Hey everyone, I'm Jeff Trowbridge, and welcome to my YouTube video where I will be ranking and counting down all of the studio albums by the great musical artist Billy Joel. Now, of course, you may be asking, why am I doing this? Clearly, I don't have any decent video equipment. I'm using a crappy webcam and don't know even how I'll be doing the editing, but, well, this is what YouTube is generally used for, right? I bet that if you do a search, you'll find other users who have done similar rankings of Billy Joel's material. You can go ahead and look for them if you want. I mean, they'll be wrong, but, you know, you're free to check that out. I haven't checked it out myself because I didn't want to be unduly influenced by other people's opinions. And as long as we're all here, you know, hunkering down, trying to escape any nasty viruses, I figure, you know, why not? So that's the first reason. The second reason would be because Billy Joel was just such a major influence upon my own musical upbringing in the 70s and 80s. The second concert that I ever went to as a child when I was about 14 years old was Billy Joel at the Notre Dame Joyce Athletic Center, which was just an amazing experience. We won't talk about the first concert I ever went to. Yeah, that's embarrassing. Well, they had a cool laser show. The third reason why I decided to make this video is because, well, I do actually have all of Billy Joel's catalog on vinyl LPs, which do make for just, you know, really good visual aids. Now, a few caveats right up front. I'm only doing the studio albums. I'm not doing any of his live albums, which means won't be doing this one. But do check it out. It's really good. Good retrospective on his early material. So, yeah, won't be doing his live albums, won't be doing any of the compilations. Also won't be doing his instrumental album, Fantasies and Delusions, which he didn't actually perform on, he just wrote it. It's also very interesting, you should check that out too. So, the 12 studio albums, let's start counting them down.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
So in 1986, Billy Joel had just come off very successful tour supporting his An Innocent Man album. He had released a greatest hits compilation, he married Christie Brinkley and had a daughter. So amidst all this, eventually the label started saying to him, hey, you're gonna put out another album for us? That'd be nice. Unfortunately, what he came up with was this. There's really no other album in Billy Joel's catalog where he clearly was just going through the motions in order to put out an album for the label. The label, of course, was trying to promote it as much as possible. They brought in guest musicians to play on the album, including Cyndi Lauper, Ray Charles, Stevie Winwood. But unfortunately, nothing on this album has the sort of introspective intelligence that we've come to expect from Billy Joel's music. It's hard to believe that this album was recorded by the same band that produced an album like Glass Houses, where that album just had so much raw energy and exuberance, everything that is just completely lacking in this effort here. The album did have a few hit songs. A Matter of Trust got a lot of airplay on MTV. There's also This Is the Time and Modern Woman. But again, this was just all very radio-friendly, very safe. I'm not saying this is a bad album. Billy Joel never really recorded a bad album. It's just that this is not very interesting and doesn't really motivate me to put it on the turntable and take it for a spin. So, moving on.
In the middle of the night, I go walking in my sleep.
In 1993, without making any official pronouncement, Billy Joel made the decision that he was going to retire from the music business. He was fed up with the rigors of touring. He had been in legal disputes with his managers, his lawyers, his ex-brother-in-law. Arguably, his marriage was probably on the rocks. They divorced a year later, even though Christie Brinkley did do the artwork for the album cover. So the River of Dreams album was constructed as basically a farewell. Unfortunately, it's a very bitter and cynical farewell. And for that reason, most of Billy Joel's fans aren't very enamored with this album. It was just such an awful way to say goodbye. For that reason, most of his fans do place this album at the bottom of their lists. Now, I don't put it there because, while this is kind of a tough listen, at least it's interesting, unlike The Bridge, where it's just not that interesting at all. Not everything on this album is dark and gloomy. I mean, it does contain a lullaby, Goodnight My Angel, which was literally a lullaby written for his daughter, and it's a really nice piece. Would have been nice nice to end the album with that rather than the cynical song Famous Last Words. The title track on this album was Billy Joel's last hit single, and probably one of the best efforts on the album, but even that song, while upbeat, still has these lyrics that just reflect the ennui that Joel was experiencing at this point in his life. For any other artist, River of Dreams would have been a decent album. It just sucks that Billy Joel had to end his career on this particular note.
I am the entertainer, and I've had to pay my price.
So in 1974, Billy Joel had finally had his breakthrough hit with Piano Man, and had been touring to support that. Came back to his temporary home in Los Angeles, settled down, and realized that he needed to put out another album to keep this momentum going. Unfortunately, he had kind of already used his best material. You know, a lot of artists have kind of a sophomore slump on their second album. Well, in Billy Joel's case, this is actually his third album. And there's some good stuff here. It's just, it's not consistent. There's a lot of different styles on this album, sort of fighting for relevance. In fact, one of the best songs on this album is an instrumental called Root Beer Rag, which is just ragtime piano. Very Scott Joplin-esque sort of music. Perhaps not coincidentally, the one hit song off this album is a song called The Entertainer, which is not a ragtime Scott Joplin song, but in fact is a song ironically about how awful it is when songs are released as singles. Already at this point in Billy Joel's career, he was having trouble with his management, he hated living in Los Angeles, and a lot of that just ended up, you know, contributing to what was basically a mediocre effort. However, he would soon say goodbye to Hollywood, return to New York, and things would get much, much better, as we will see in the remainder of the countdown. So in 1989, for reasons that are not altogether clear, Billy Joel fired his longtime producer, Phil Ramone, and most of his band, and hired Mick Jones, a foreigner, to produce Stormfront. A risky move to be sure, but after the mediocrity of The Bridge, this decision kind of paid off, really. This album has a monster sound. It produced no less than 5 hit singles, 2 of which, We Didn't Start the Fire and I Go to Extremes, are still, you know, kind of popular even today. Billy Joel also recorded the song Shameless, which, while not a hit for him, was covered by Garth Brooks and became one of his monster worldwide hits. You do start to feel a little bit of the cynicism creeping in on this material that would become so much more apparent on River of Dreams. But at least this keeps you entertained. It's a solid album. All the songs are catchy and memorable, even though the sound is a bit of a departure from what we had normally come to expect from Billy Joel. So if you want a good example of his later material, this would be the album to go with. So, now that we've covered everything from the end of his career, let's go all the way back to the beginning, shall we?
She's got a way about her.
Billy Joel's life would probably make just an incredible documentary, except for the fact that nobody would believe it because of how weird it is. In the late 1960s, Billy Joel was part of a psychedelic rock band called the Hassles, which weren't bad. He recorded 2 albums with them. On the second album, he became the lead singer. Following that, he and another member, John Small, formed a band called Attila, which put out one album which was really, really awful. In fact, in Billy Joel's own words today, he describes it as psychedelic bullshit. Attila didn't stay together long, not only because their album was crap, but also because Billy Joel started sleeping with John Small's wife. That relationship didn't work out. A short time later, Joel tried to kill himself by swallowing a bottle of pills, and John Small ended up saving his life. So they would reconcile, and in fact Small would work with Billy Joel later in his career, doing some production work. Anyway, so after all of that, Joel decided to reinvent himself as a more sensitive singer-songwriter. So his first effort as a solo artist was Cold Spring Harbor. This album didn't sell well, like, at all. But nowhere else will you be able to hear Billy Joel's pure singer-songwriter efforts, just stripped down, mostly him on the piano. I mean, there is a backing band, but half the time you forget it's even there. The only songs off this album that you might recognize are She's Got Away and Everybody Loves You Now, and that's only because they were featured on his live album, Songs in the Attic, and in fact, the live version of She's Got Away became a minor hit for him. As if there wasn't already enough weirdness in Billy Joel's life at this point, when his first album came out, it turned out that the record label had made some kind of a bizarre mastering error and sped up the tapes by about, like, 25%? How nobody caught this during the process is just unfathomable to me. Rumor has it that when Billy Joel finally received his promo copy and was listening to it in his home, that he actually ripped it off the turntable, walked out his front door, and chucked it down the street like a frisbee. And it wasn't until, this was 1971, it wasn't until 1983 that Columbia finally released a corrected copy, although on this version they actually re-edited, remixed everything. I've got to get a hold of the original version, just, if nothing else, to hear Billy Joel singing like Donald Duck. At any rate, definitely check out this album. I mean, like any artist's first effort, it's not perfect, but it does show his stripped-down, sensitive side in a way that definitely shows that there are great things to come. Okay, so remember when I said that a lot of Billy Joel's later stuff fails because it's so bitter and cynical? Well, let's talk about the Nylon Curtain. So, okay, sure, this album is very cynical, but unlike his later stuff, this cynicism is more rooted in social commentary. It's about problems in the world and trying to make a statement about it. And as far as that social commentary goes, this album touches on so many things, from job losses in Pennsylvania on the song Allentown, to the Vietnam War in Goodnight Saigon, to his monster hit Pressure, which is just all about the anxieties that we deal with every day. And so for that reason, even though this album is kind of dark, it's still approachable, it's still meaningful to us as the listener, rather than his later stuff where he's just being self-indulgent and pissed off for who knows how many reasons. Yes, this album does have its detractors. There are those that say, well, he's just more fun when he's not so serious, or that his lyrics just don't get quite introspective enough. You know, and you're going to find your own opinions on that. The Nylon Curtain is a very strong effort, and the only reason it ranks this low is because of what's yet to come. So, in less than 1 year's time, we go from one of the darkest albums of Billy Joel's catalog to the release of one of the most upbeat albums of his entire career. An Innocent Man was extraordinarily successful. What we have here is Billy Joel, in his own words, reliving his youth. The influences of the 1960s are all over this album. In fact, the music video for Tell Her About It, the first single off the album, includes an Ed Sullivan look-alike to really drive home the point that, yeah, this is a kind of a 1960s throwback album. So what brought about this crazy new upbeat departure from what Billy Joel normally does? I don't know, maybe begging Christie Brinkley? But whatever the reason, massive hits off this album. Uptown Girl, the title track, For the Longest Time, which is a 5-part a cappella barbershop song with Billy Joel doing all of the vocals. It's really good stuff. This album really solidified Billy Joel's place on MTV in the 80s. It brought in just, you know, a whole bunch of new fans who found this style of music very appealing. Of course, the downside to that was that it was kind of a one-off thing, and Joel's enthusiasm would eventually abate, as seen on most of his later material. So while I'm giving this album all these accolades, you may be wondering why I haven't ranked it higher. It's just that normally when I want to listen to Billy Joel, it's not because I want to hear this. So there are people out there that are going to make the argument that this album should be ranked higher, and I'm sure I wouldn't find fault with those arguments, but this is where I place it, so yeah, deal with it. So here we have Billy Joel's sophomore effort, where the titular track was not only the biggest hit of his early career, but also gave him a nickname that would follow him for the rest of his career. And a well-earned one it was. The song Piano Man was very much autobiographical. Billy Joel at the time had been trying to promote his first album without a whole lot of success. He was playing in piano bars, just trying to raise money to keep his head above water. Meanwhile, he was writing a lot of music. A lot of really good music. This album is interesting in that it's all about character sketches. Aside from the title track, it's not so much about him personally. This is Billy Joel coming out as a storyteller, and doing so in a way that's really artistic and engaging. And he was rewarded for it. He was signed to a long-term deal on Columbia Records. The album went 4 times platinum. He toured. The only thing the album is lacking is maybe a bit of the sophistication, particularly with regard to instrumentation, that we would hear on some of his later albums when the jazz influences and other things started to kick in. But for a sophomore effort, this is pretty darn good. Okay, so we already talked about how, following the release of Piano Man, Billy Joel did hit a bit of a creative rut. Ultimately, he decided that being in Los Angeles was just not helping him, so he returned to his home state of New York and started to put together this album, and boy, that change get his creative juices flowing. 2 songs off the album, Say Goodbye to Hollywood and New York State of Mind, both very much autobiographical, as Joel was just so thrilled to get away from Los Angeles. This album is where we really start to see the maturing process in not only Joel's songwriting, but also his understanding of the production values. Things that would really come into fruition, maybe, I don't know, 1 album later. We'll talk about that in a bit. The Turnstile album didn't produce any major big hits, certainly nothing like Piano Man, but it did start to get the attention of critics. He started to really develop more of a loyal fan base, and it was clear that things were going to get much better very quickly. So for the Turnstiles album, Billy Joel had put together a rhythm section for his band, featuring Doug Stegmeyer on bass guitar and Liberty DeVito on drums, and that would carry him through some of the greatest albums of his career. Following Turnstiles, there were 3 albums in a row, which you'll find are atop the countdown that we are currently progressing through. This would be the middle album from that group, 52nd Street. This album would feature the introduction of a lot of jazz influences, which I guess is represented by Billy Joel holding a trumpet on the cover, even though I don't think he plays it. So you've got some songs with just some crazy grooving rhythms like Zanzibar and the title track, but you've also got a lot of radio-friendly stuff, like the song My Life and Big Shot, the latter of which is some pretty hard-driving rock. So yeah, 52nd Street stands very well on its own, but it also serves as a bridge kind of between the album that came right before and the album that came right after. And we're going to talk about both of those real shortly here. Okay, so of the top 3 albums in this countdown, which I've already mentioned were consecutive, albeit not in the same order, this was the 3rd to be released in 1980, Glass Houses. With the acquisition of a new lead guitarist in David Brown, Joel on this album was really stepping up the rock and roll influence. I think he was perhaps somewhat tired of being pegged as just a simple songwriter, ballads. He wanted to show that he could really get out there and rock and roll. Now, this is not a hard rock album by any means. It's still kind of radio-friendly, and it still produced hits after hits after hits, like You May Be Right. It's still rock and roll to me. This album just features all the great songwriting hooks of everything that came before it, but with just a little bit more of an edge to it, which makes it just a really fun listen over and over again. It never gets old. In many ways, this was the album that really solidified Billy Joel as a stage performer and set the stage for some of his most successful tours that would happen later. Alright, so now that you've heard the penultimate entry on our journey to number 1, what could be left? If you're a fan, you already know what it is, but here it goes, drum roll! what can you say about an album that sold 10 million copies and at the time of its release was the best-selling album ever on Columbia Records? Spawned 5 hit singles, including a song that inspired a musical. An album that includes a 7.5-minute epic song that is almost Beatle-esque in the way it fuses different styles and tells a story and just sticks with you despite repeated listenings. Not to mention having a song that was considered blasphemous so that the religious groups wanted to ban it. I mean, how awesome is that? This album does all of those things and more. It is truly a musical masterpiece, and I don't say that lightly. This album features so many different styles of music that you'd think it would feel disjointed, and yet somehow they all work together and enhance each other. You've got Billy Joel crafting these haunting, brooding melodies like on the title track, and then just going, you know, apeshit, horny teenage boy on Only the Good Die Young. You've got the touching ballad in Just the Way You Are, and the slightly more cynical perspective on relationships in She's Always a Woman. Moving Out, a song that young people can identify with. There is something for everyone on this album, and it is all crafted together so beautifully. This is Billy Joel's first album with producer Phil Ramone, who would stick with him through the next, 4 or 5 albums. But this is just absolutely his masterpiece. Everything from the musicianship to the production values to the songwriting. There's nothing to complain about here. This basically summarizes everything that was great about Billy Joel's career, and that is still great about him as a person. I mean, he's still out there. He's still kicking. He's just not doing the music thing anymore. And you know what? That's okay. You know, he's earned a respite. Okay, so there you have it. There is my ranking of Billy Joel's studio albums, for better or for worse. You know, you're free to leave your comments. Just, you know, be civil. It's okay to disagree, as long as you can back up your argument. Hey, no problem with that at all. I'm not going to tell you to like or subscribe because I'm not making any money off this, so I really don't care. I just, you know, hope that somebody finds this interesting. If there seems to be enough interest, maybe I'll do it for another artist. Another one where I've got all of their material on vinyl. So anyway, for as long as the social distancing is in effect, and maybe longer, stay safe, be good to each other, and maybe I'll yap at you later.